said. Fine.
Sean, I want to ask you, what were some of your favorites in the genre that really inspired this film? And then what were the aspects of the coming of age experience that you wanted to add to this genre?
A lot of times when I think of coming of age movies, I really use that term just because I think it's the term that is sort of within the industry. But I feel like coming of age, to me, my favorite ones are like loss of innocence movies. I've always been really drawn to movies about youth and adolescence and, movies that really took the emotions of young people and treated them with emotional maturity. And I think when I think back to my own adolescence, especially the time depicted in our movie, it was a very formative and turbulent time in my life. When I looked back at my adolescence as I entered my 20s and, started to become a filmmaker and was like figuring out what kind of stories I wanted to tell, it sort of occurred to me that none of them ever starred like a kid that looked like me or Izaac. And it just kind of felt like, okay, there's something here that is ripe to mine that I think can, if we do it right, it can hopefully be a worthy, fresh entry into, a genre that is, a little oversaturated.
Next, Izaac, I want to ask you, you've been a professional actor since you were, I was trying to do the math on your IMDb, like 10 or 11?
8.
Since you were 8, okay, which was like, how many years ago?
8.
God, okay. One of your biggest roles, I think a lot of people might, maybe not have seen, but know or heard Izaac from, you were Boone, the Shrimporium proprietor in Raya the Last Dragon. I just wanted to give a shout out to DIDI producer, Carlos Lopez Estrada, who directed that film. But I say all this because there's quite a range, that you've been able to show in just a short amount of years. I want to emphasize this because sometimes I think people don't give young actors enough credit, especially for really naturalistic work like DIDI is. And so I want to know, what did you find easiest and what did you find most challenging about playing Wang Wang?
That is a really good question. I'd say the easiest thing was being comedic and being myself, because I do come from a background where it's mostly just comedic acting, like comedic work. So scenes where like I was messing around with like Aaron and Raul, who play Fahad and Soup, or just like overall trying to just be myself. That was kind of where I wouldn't say the easiest, it was easier. I think the hardest scenes for me, because I come from a background that's mostly comedic, is the dramatic scenes, like scenes with Joan, for example, like the car scene where we both fight. It was difficult because it was my first time leading a movie, and it was also my first time leading a character in a drama. Playing a character that was more vulnerable than myself was a very difficult challenge to overcome, but eventually I kind of got the hang of it, and then I did the movie, and then, yeah.
This film has a lot of up-and-coming actors. It even has first-time actors like your own grandma. For those who don't know, Wang Wang's grandmother is played by one of Sean's real grandmothers, one of the stars of his Oscar-nominated short, Nai Nai and Waipo. Yes, go ahead and clap for that. This is the Academy,
Smattering of applause.
This is the Academy. We should clap for that. But you do have one legend, anchoring the cast, and that's you, Joan. I wanted to ask, you have worked with an international roster of iconic filmmakers. Bertolucci, I was writing this down, Bertolucci, David Lynch, Oliver Stone, Ang Lee, Jia Zhangke, everybody. And yet you also have a track record of supporting emerging filmmakers, such as Alice Wu and Eric Byler and now Sean. What was it when you were given this script? Why did you say yes to this project?
I received the script with Sean's letter and Sean's lookbook. He wrote a beautiful letter to me, and then I read the script. I was actually very happily surprised. I didn't expect, at that time he was 28, wrote such a solid, mature script about, of course, adolescence, but in its heart, son and daughter, that kind of love, sensitivity, gentleness. It was just the script, really, that first attracted me to want to speak to Sean. This young man can see from the most mundane the poignancy, the beauty, the poetry. I also know that I can relate to the part because I am myself an immigrant mother raising two American children. There is so much love, but also fraught with misunderstanding and cultural chasm. But I did have doubt because I am older than this character. And so I felt that would I be like, this is a consistent world that he's creating. In the casting, if something is not right, believable, then it ruins the film. So I told Sean that I really want him to think about it. Yeah.
Sean, how long did you think about it?
10 seconds. She
Make
was
that
like,
9.
think about it, and then and then we had coffee, and then I got in my car and I texted her. I was like, all right, thought about it, I think, and I was like, all right, let's do it.
One of the unique features of DIDI as a coming of age film is that it's set during the coming of age of social media itself. And so I wanted to know, how did you use, period appropriate technology as both an emotional tool and a storytelling device? And again, I think if anybody's done their research, you have a background at Google Creative Labs, and I think you worked on some of those like amazing like Super Bowl ads or
My bosses did.
your bosses worked.
I worked on less cool ones, but I learned from the greats.
But tell me a little bit about the use of like technology to evoke everything you wanted it to.
Yeah, well, I think one thing, I don't know if you guys remember some of like the early Google commercials that like where it's just like the first things that ever really took place on screens. There's an early Google commercial called Parisian Love, and it's a 60-second commercial, and it's just about this guy who goes to Paris, falls in love, gets married, and has a kid, and it's like so emotional. It's all told through Google searches, and my bosses were the ones who made those commercials. And I think I thought I was only going to work there for a year and then come back to LA and be like, oh, I worked at Google, I go direct all these big commercials, and that's not what happened. But I really felt like I was learning a new language of filmmaking, because up until then, my idea of filmmaking, whether it was live action or documentary or narrative, it was you have a camera, you have your actors, you have a script, and that's filmmaking. And in a way, I got to Google, and they were like, you have none of that. You have a timeline, you have user interfaces, and you have to make something that can tell a story and be emotional. And so it was really there that I was like, oh, I'm like a blinking cursor, when you use it in the right context, that can build anticipation. And when the speed of a cursor or like the click of a button, depending on how you frame it, it can mean all these different things, and it's not unlike Searching, directed by Anish Chagant, who also worked at Creative Lab. I had never seen the internet that I grew up with kind of depicted on screen in a way that I remembered. And I think, even when people do cut to the internet, it's always like the screen and they cut back to a reaction shot and it's like, oh my, or they're like saying the things that they're typing out loud. And I'm like, that's not how people use the internet, And I think I wanted to try and depict the internet in a way in our movie that was, again, emotional and human and cinematic, but without straying away from the fact that it is this like, it's mundane but deeply felt.
Izaac, you were born a year before this film was set. And so I'm curious both from a technological standpoint and also from like when Sean talks about representation and when we talk about, wow, it's so important to see more Asians on film. Like, I'm genuinely curious about like for your generation, what do you relate to that you feel like, yeah, I kind of have that too? And what is just like totally different for being somebody who's like 13 in 2020?
When I was 13, something that I found myself relating to a lot was like, I was such a dork in 2020. Like, it was COVID. I was homeschooled my like basically entire middle school, chronically online every day. And so like I found myself on like anime Discord servers and like just like these really cringe things that you would bully a kid online for, And like, not saying that's a good thing, but like I would get bullied. I did get bullied. But I mean, finding myself in a community of like where like I would find all these other weird kids, and maybe this isn't the most relatable, but like just finding a little pocket of friends online for me was something that was really special, because all my friends were just as weird as I was, And like having that weird group of like online kids, even though we were a little weird, it was still fun and we still had an amazing time. I'd say one thing that was a lot more different is like definitely the way that people act on the internet, for sure. I mean, like depicting what was depicted through the movie was kind of just like I don't think people were afraid to show off who they were through their profile pages, right? Like if you look at Maddie's profile, she has like all the songs she likes, all the movies she likes. I feel like now people like being a lot more anonymous, right? Like if you go on Instagram, half the profiles you see are private, right? And like no one really likes showing off who they truly are. And I think that that's something that's changed a lot is people are more afraid of other people on the internet than they were before because like I think the internet was less about being anonymous and more about just being yourself. At least back in 2008.
Joan, you have a long career that, I mean, just the Hollywood part of it alone is almost 40 years. And I think that I would love to know from your perspective how the landscape for Asian and specifically like Asian American artists in Hollywood, has changed.
Fortunately, it has changed for the better. I think a great deal. Of course, my biggest break was The Last Emperor. And in Last Emperor, which won, as you all know, 9 Oscars, I never came here to sit here to talk to the members. It was not even a thought that crossed anybody's mind. And it didn't even cross my own mind. And the times are so different. And, for this wonderful indie film, for a supporting part, I'm here, I'm actually talking to my members. It has changed so much, and I'm so happy that Sean, and I did a couple of other films of very young directors. It's something just from the depths of the heart about his family, and to have that truth conveyed and accepted, and I think it's just wonderful, and I feel so fortunate that I'm still here and alive and vertical. I can still do things. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. I love
Thank you,
this
Rebecca.
work.
Thank you guys
Thank you.
so much
Thank you
for coming.
so much.